Was there a point where you're like, maybe I'll just let this batch go, or you decided like, no, once you see them, you have to try?
Yeah. There was maybe a moment where I was like, how am I going to do this? But I thought, I can't not try. We learn from every attempt. So it was the coolest thing the first morning when I turned on that light and got to literally see them shed and pop out those claws.
So you're actually actively watching them transition through those phases.
So.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say congratulations, because you are in a very small number of people basically in history that have ever done this. Do you know how many people have done it? It's got to be less than 20, right?
Yes. So we're third in the United States.
That's amazing.
And I've been told 12th in the world.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. So today we have a returning guest on the podcast. That is Darcy Madsen of Crab Central Station. If you remember last year, we released an episode, and I think it was July of 2021 or maybe June of 2021. Happens to be one of the most popular episodes ever released on this podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, I want you to go back and listen to that first, because it's somewhat of a prereq before we get into this conversation. I don't delve into some of the details that I know we talked about on the first episode. So if you listen to this one first, you may be a little bit confused about some of the terminology that Darcy uses. So go back and listen to that one, and then you should have a good foundation to jump into this episode. Last time we discussed the plight of the hermit crab, how they are abused in the pet keeping industry and really just treated like souvenirs, and how to care for them properly. Of course, we covered that. And then we discussed the breeding projects that Darcy and her two daughters, Faith and Brooke, were getting themselves into, which is an absolutely insane amount of work. Now, we brought them back on because they were actually successful from our last conversation. So between last summer when we recorded and now, they have had a successful breeding of hermit crabs, which makes them one of 12-ish people in the entire history of the globe to have ever bred hermit crabs in captivity, because it is an incredible, laborious task that is super finicky, and we do get into that in this episode as well. So every time I talk to Darcy, my mind is blown at the amount of dedication that these crab people have when it comes to these projects. It's really incredible, and Darcy and her daughters are absolutely no exception. The amount of work that they did to make this happen is amazing. So we discussed the breeding crab, or the captive breeding project that they did, how it was successful, the mistakes they made in the past, and what they've changed, and how you bring crabs from a tiny microscopic egg and zoe all the way up to an actual land crab. It's a remarkable story, and I know you will enjoy this just as much as you enjoyed the last one. Before we jump into the episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you will find links to everything mentioned in today's episode, as well as any other episode that has been recorded up until this point. You can also find a link to the store if you do want to buy yourself a t-shirt or sweater. $5 is automatically donated to the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy. And if you are interested in supporting the podcast monetarily, you can join us over on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can join us, and you will have automatic access to the Discord server. There we just have just myself and the listeners of the podcast chat reptiles. It's a lot of fun. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can join us there. Every dollar does really, really help. As I've talked about many times up until the last few episodes, I'm starting to outsource my editing, which does cost money. So any way you can help is greatly appreciated. And thank you so much to customreptilehabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. There is an affiliate link in both the YouTube description and the show notes. If you do use that link and make a purchase, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you, which of course helps me produce the show. Enjoy the episode. All right, well, Darcy, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
I will say it's funny because obviously the podcast I do is mostly in the reptile world. I branch out into other exotic or specialized pets once in a while. And funnily enough, the episode that you and I recorded last summer or last spring, whenever it was, is the most popular episode that I've ever recorded. And especially the last 6 weeks, for whatever reason, YouTube or the YouTube gods decided that everybody needed to see this, and it's been getting like hundreds of views a day, up to like 2,000 or 3,000 views a day. It's crazy. So I think in the last, I should have checked before. It's around 40,000 views, and that 20,000 of those or more happened in the last 6 weeks or so. So it's crazy, but this is a perfectly timed episode then, so it's amazing.
Yes, I'm so excited. I know we've had some weather things kind of get in between. Texas is crazy in the spring, but I mean, we are just so excited to be back on the podcast. Thank you for inviting us, and we're so excited to share our news. So.
Yeah, there's some pretty amazing things happening on your end. So why don't you bring us back up to speed real quick? I imagine most people will have listened to the first episode, but if they didn't, you had just finished. Well, actually, why don't we just start with a review of who you are, the projects you're working on, and then we'll get into the build behind you.
Hello, my name is Darcy Madsen. I am a co-content creator for a YouTube channel called Crab Central Station, which my two daughters and I created. Back in 2017, we were at a family vacation in Puerto Rico, and my daughter decided that she wanted a hermit crab as a souvenir. Strange that they would sell live pets as souvenirs, but they do. And so, we got some basic information about how to care for them. I'm making this very summed up, but, basically, they gave us the care recommendations and the supplies that we would need to take care of the hermit crab without doing any additional research on our part, which we have now, of course, learned that was not a good idea. And so we impulse bought these very first hermit crabs, thinking that they were easy to care for, they were inexpensive, and we were under the impression that they were a short-term commitment because we were told they wouldn't actually live that long. Shortly after getting our new friends back to the beach house we were staying at, Brooke started doing some research because she just really enjoys that. And it became very apparent very quickly that hermit crabs were not an easy pet. They required a lot more to really take care of them properly. And they're a long-term commitment, actually. And so that kind of started our whole journey in taking care of hermit crabs. I think a lot of people maybe would have gotten frustrated and given up on the idea of hermit crabs at that point, but it was actually bringing our family together, giving us something to do together, creating this family hobby. And we were enjoying learning about them, and the fact that they were a little more complicated actually seemed more interesting to us. And we kind of took it as a challenge. Mm-hmm. And so, at the time, my daughters were taking film in high school. And so we kind of got this idea about putting together a YouTube channel because the information available at the time, especially on YouTube, there just wasn't a whole lot. And most of it was either outdated or very conflicting. And so once we kind of did a bunch of research and decided, which care recommendations we felt like were the best and that we were going to commit to and follow, the girls asked if we could start our own channel to share that, to educate more people. And so I was like, yeah, let's do that. And that just kind of started this crazy journey. And we never dreamed that it would be where it is now. So
yeah, it is pretty amazing, and it definitely filled a hole. There was an absence of this information on the internet. And again, if people want to listen to the full story of that, go to the first episode because we get into more of the importance of the abuse that hermit crabs go through, and maybe we'll probably get onto that as well in this episode because it is so important. But as far as the giant setup you have behind you, I think last time we spoke, I want to say it had just been set up. Maybe it had only been up for a couple of months type thing. And so now it's basically a full year later, and you have this huge setup. For those that are just listening, it's basically almost a one continuous enclosure that wraps around their entire room. So maybe you could talk about how big it is actually. But I'm curious, how is it functioning, and have you had to make any changes since the last time we spoke?
Great question. So I actually brought you to the other side of the build. So the first time we met, we were on the forest side, and now we're on the beach side, which we did talk about in that episode. But basically, we have 5 large aquarium tanks lining the perimeter of a bedroom in my house. And we use Exoterra terrariums as toppers. We turn them upside down and we take off the screen lid part. And then the crabs are able to traverse up and over to the next aquarium. So they're all kind of butted up next to each other. So there's no space in between the tanks whatsoever. And those upside Exoterras is what give the crabs access to all the other tanks. So they have a combined about 710 gallons of aquarium space. And I have 3 different pools for them, which are 10-gallon aquariums inside of that build. They have 2 freshwater and 1 saltwater. And so, yeah, we did separate the build into 2 sides. One was more foresty, which, just means we have a lot of natural wood and leaf litter, moss and lichens, and fallen branches, like something that you would just normally expect to see in a forest. And then on the side behind me is the beach side, which you do see a few wood pieces. Those are mostly just for the traversing the 2 tanks, but it's mostly shells, and we have some rock. We created this little jetty looking thing over here behind me. And so it's a lot of coconut hides and things like that, palm branch type foliage. So just to symbolize, what you would see on the beach side. And also this tank right over my head, this Exoteria, is the only one in our build that actually has a UVB light. And so we've been collecting data on, how often do hermit crabs use UVB? How long do they stay there? Do they seem to need it to thrive and that sort of thing? Because that's very controversial in the hermit crab community. And so those are kind of the things that we've been just watching, how often do crabs stay on one side of the tank versus the other? And this has been now built for, I think, almost 15 months. And so I can confidently say hermit crabs like the forest side of the build.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, I am pretty convinced that they only go to the beach side to spawn, or like in the middle of the night, they will forage over there, looking for, food or whatever that's kind of washed up onto the beach. But you don't see them on the side of the build hardly ever during the day. I have not seen hermit crabs using the UVB light significantly. I mean, truly. Now, I probably should go ahead and try and move it to the forest side, since I've noticed that they spend most of the time, and see if that makes a difference. But they're definitely not coming to this beach side just to get UVB, which I would think if they needed that really to thrive, that they would come over there, but they haven't. So that's probably going to be the next thing I do, is try to move it to the other side of the tank. But yeah, they use this side so little that I'm actually considering changing one more of these tanks into being the forest part, and just having this one tank be the actual beach.
And I forget, do you have cameras at night so you can view what's happening when you're not in the room, or do you just pop in sometimes in the middle of the night just to see what they're up to?
We did. We did have cameras in there until the breeding season began, and then we moved those cameras over for that purpose.
Oh, okay. So you did have some access to watching them at night, and actually they just spend short amounts of time in the beach side and then head back to the forest side.
Yes, but I am convinced that this is very important for breeding. I do think they need to see that there is the beach side, and that they have those resources available. And you can actually see the little crab right here.
Yeah, I can see him walking around. Yeah.
Very unusual, but guess what I just discovered literally an hour ago?
What?
This little Lila is carrying eggs.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So that's why she's hanging out on the beach side then.
Yes. And my first clue actually was that she has been spending time over here for about the last week and a half, which is very unusual. And so I just got a really good glimpse inside her shell about an hour ago, and sure enough, she has eggs. So that is a Lila, which is an Indonesian, from Indonesia. And so I'm super excited. Also, while we're on the topic of that, yesterday I picked up another female Lila from a local friend who also has hermit crabs. And she had discovered that her female Lila was carrying eggs. And so she wanted me to kind of pick her up to try and raise them. And so I actually added her to this tank yesterday, and then found out that one of mine also has eggs.
Oh, wow.
So this must be breeding season for Lila species.
Well, it's really, yeah, it could be. There could be like the weather, barometric pressure. Who knows what the hell's going on with them, because we know so little about breeding some of these species. And it's really remarkable that you found out that they're spending most of their time on the forested side, because, I mean, we talked about it before with how horrible the care is right out of the box from these souvenir type shops. People set up this beach scenario, like, most of the care is so bad, and then they do even worse by just giving the beach option, typically, right? It's like sand or whatever, fake palm trees and whatnot. And it's pretty amazing to see that they spend most of their time on the forest. So as hermit crabs become more popular in the pet hobby, I guess part of that care will be providing more of a forested area, which I don't think most people would even realize.
Absolutely. I mean, I cover the entire substrate on the forest side with leaf litter, and they have the moss, the lichens, and during the spring, like just recently, I started adding dehydrated flowers. And there's always the bark that are on all of the different trees and the fallen limbs and things like that over there. And I have different types like cork, cholla, mopani, grapewood. Also, there's like just oak branches from our property that we can collect and sanitize. And so they have a ton of different choices, but they are just always scavenging for that just natural, forest foliage like that. And I have to replace it so often. I mean, it would shock you how often they go through that entire covered floor of just leaf litter.
So before this giant enclosure, this has got to be one of the biggest hermit crab enclosures out there. Before this setup that you've made with the specific beach and forested side, was there any speculation on how to set up an enclosure, or was this something that people were still wondering?
I think so, definitely, because I mean, honestly, most of our ideas come from years and years of research, and people have a lot of, just experience raising hermit crabs. And so from them, we learned how important leaf litter and moss and lichens and bark and all of that really is to their diet. But I don't think I realized just how important and the amount that they would eat was, until we did this big build.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. And then do you have a freshwater source in the forested side, or is there some sort of saltwater bath on that side?
So there's 2 10-gallon aquariums, both freshwater on the forest side.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really remarkable. So I'm glad that you have another year of data, and the next test will be seeing with the UV on the other side. But I suspect that since they are pretty much nocturnal foragers, they probably they might not even respond to it.
Right, and that's been, I think, the biggest debate within the hermit crab community. And so, but I mean, you never know until you try things and you collect that data and you try different things and see if that changes the results. I mean, that's just kind of how science works. So yeah, we're just one more person adding to data.
And then I know we talked about this before with the depth of substrate. You have like 12 inches, it looks like, of sand. And I know that was really important for the crabs to go down and do their molting process. But have you had to clean the sand or change the sand or anything? Or is that you just leave it?
Not at all. Going 15 months strong without any problem whatsoever. You can actually see, I think if I move over, you can see a molting crab.
Yeah. There he is. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. So every once in a while, they leave you a really nice little window into their molting process. But no, I mean, the substrate has been great. We haven't had any issues. And that's the thing, like I said, it kind of takes a lot to get your enclosure set up, in the beginning, and it is a little bit pricey. I mean, depending on how big of a setup you decide to get. But once you set up your hermit crab's enclosure, the maintenance of it and upkeep of it is so simple, honestly. And so, yeah, you can go many years having the same substrate as long as, you don't have a bacterial bloom or a mold kind of fungus outbreak, or any kind of bug infestation. Those are the things that typically, or a flood, that would make you have to replace the whole thing.
Right. Well, why don't we get into the breeding? Because last time we spoke, you guys were attempting to breed, and I'm trying to remember, last time, were you in the middle of a process, or had you just failed at one? I can't remember. Do you remember?
Yes, I believe that we had just finished at our last failing attempt. Yes.
Okay, so why don't we remind people of the life cycle of a hermit crab? So you can just remind us of the process from egg to land crab, those things, and then we'll talk about how you actually have to go about doing it in captivity. Because one of the themes I'd seen in some of the comments, a very small amount of comments in the episode that we did, is people think, well, who cares? It's just a hermit crab. Why would we go through all this work? It doesn't make any sense. There's thousands of them or millions of them outside in the wild. Why don't we just pull from the wild? And my response always is, A, if they have a passion to do it, they should do it. B, if we don't have to pull from the wild, we shouldn't. And C, who knows what you're going to learn in this process. So but people sort of see them as maybe like bugs or something, and like, what's the point? But there is a point to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're very passionate about it because we want to change the industry. The wild caught industry is not a good one. And okay, so you think it's okay to go catch, millions of hermit crabs, but that does change, the ecosystem. They're the scavengers, of the beaches. And as soon as you make too big of a footprint in one spot, you're going to affect others, and we're seeing that in some countries. We're seeing where hermit crabs, the numbers are becoming so low that they're actually labeling them as endangered and actually starting to put regulations in place, right? And so to me, that we're already too late at that point. Yeah. So it is really important. And, it just takes somebody to stand up and say there needs to be change here, and I'm going to be a part of the change. And, then other people kind of join the movement, if you will. But it's a long process. It takes a lot of time. And you do need supporters. So I do feel like we have a lot of support. And I know in the hermit crab community, especially, they're very, very supportive. We have a lot of people on board with captive breeding, which has been really, really awesome.
Well, they have so many things that are against them. The first is it is so easy to collect them in the wild, and there's so many that make their way over here, despite the amount that actually die in that process. And then how difficult it is if it was simple for them to breed in captivity, you could see, it would make more sense. But not only are they easy to get through wild caught methods, they are so complicated and difficult and tedious to breed that it's really a recipe for having no captive bred market.
Yes, for sure. And, we're hoping to change that. We definitely have to find a process of breeding that is sustainable and, one that can be repeated in a lot of different houses by different caretakers. And so that's something that we definitely are working on, is how can we make this more simple? How can we make it, readily available to other people where they can reproduce what we're doing? So I know for sure, that's something that we're going to be focusing on this year during breeding season. So that's definitely something to keep, just to think about. But, going back to your question about the whole kind of life cycle of it is, so you have your mating, and then the female hermit crab carries the fertilized eggs in her shell. And depending on your species will depend on the amount of days that she carries them. Some species, we don't actually know the answer to that yet because they've never been bred in captivity. And so that's definitely something we're still kind of guessing. But on the species we know that have carried eggs and then spawned them, it's generally somewhere between 23 to 28 days generally. I mean, give or take a few days on either side. And then you have to have a saltwater pool that the female can go and spawn the eggs into. If she spawns them on the sand, they won't hatch and they'll die. If she spawns them in fresh water, they will die immediately. And so you have to have a saltwater pool available. And then the female crab will get on the edge of the water, or, they can fully submerge, and then they flick the eggs kind of out of the back of their shell. And as soon as they hit that salt water, the egg hatches, and then you have the first larval stage of the hermit crab. And so the first 5 stages, of their life is in the water, completely in the water. And so they go through different changes, and each stage, they will shed their exoskeleton. And that is where they gain more anatomy through each stage. And again, this all depends on the species. So purple pinchers, we know go through 5 stages. Pretty sure that the strawberry crabs also go through 5 from our experience last summer. But there are some species like lilas and violas that have an abbreviated larval stage, and they only go through 4. And so, does that mean that they're developing more in the egg before they're spawned? Probably. Yeah. And so we definitely, have to gather some more information on that.
And that's the amazing thing about this, is how sparse the information is on these. It's not like universities are out having a lab out in these research labs breeding hermit crabs to learn about them. I suspect eventually, if you haven't already, you guys will hear, the hermit crab community who's doing this captive breeding will hear from universities who are trying to research these species, because nobody is doing it. That is a really important reason to be playing around and learning all these different facts about each different species.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Mary Akers, most successful captive breeder, has, I think, more contact with people like that and has done some some news interviews and things like that, and has been published in a book. And so I know the information is getting out there. It's very slowly. It's getting out there. So that's really promising and very encouraging and exciting. But yeah, so a lot of it is just trial and error. It's like truly going back to school and using the scientific method to figure out what you're doing, and if it's going to work and what's not working, and you make some changes, and that's just kind of how it goes.
So can you remind me of the larval stage names? There's egg, and then is it Zoe? Is that right? And then what comes after that?
Yep. So yeah, egg, and then the Zoe or Zoea, and then after that is the megalopa, and that's where they get their claws. And then they come to land with their shell. And once they do a final molt and survive that molt, then they're officially a land hermit crab.
Okay. So can you remind us of how small the megalopa and the Zoe are?
Yes, microscopic. So I have a tiny little shell that I can show you. Actually, I have a whole bunch of them in this shell, but I can get one out if you want. I don't know if you can see.
I can see they're basically the size of pebbles.
Yeah, it's small. I dropped one somewhere, but let me see if I can get just one out here. So these are actually some of the very first shells that they took.
So before their first molt, do they even go into a shell, or are they just kind of soft-bodied until that last molt, or I guess their first molt, and then they go find a shell?
They find a shell first.
Okay.
Yep. And then they're in water still as megalopa, and you have all these tiny shells down on the floor and some up on this little bridge. And so they find their shell, and then they crawl up the bridge and go over to a land tank that I have for them. And it has sand and everything. So that as soon as they exit that water for the very first time is the first time they're breathing air. Okay. And so that's like the final larval, stage of a megalopa, is to change into having those modified gills and getting up on land, being able to breathe air. And then they go and molt, and they're officially a land crab.
So it's this tiny little pebble shaped. It doesn't even look like a shell. It's so small. And they are snail shells, right? That's what they are, like small species of snail or something, or who knows what they are.
Yeah, they're different kinds. I have several different kinds because different species of crabs like different openings of shells, and their abdomens can be different lengths. And so some crabs like, longer shells versus shorter shells. And so there's just all kinds of different ones, but they're all teeny tiny.
Yeah. So that process, the process of taking them from eggs to Zoe, I remember last time we were talking about this massive water changes you're constantly doing and having to individually move the Zoe with a pipette from one tank to a clean water. And so why don't we talk about some of the failures? We can talk more about the process through some of these failures. So you tried, I think, about 5 times until you had the success. So we'll leave the success for after. But why don't you walk us through some of the failures? How far did you guys get, and what did you learn along the way?
Okay, so the first 4 attempts were consistently, we only got to day 11. And we always failed on day 11. We were having some massive issues with this kind of green algae that was growing inside of our chrysal. The chrysal has the movement like an ocean. We use air stones to get the water moving in a circular way. It's temperature, we can't put the heater in the chrysal itself because the Zoe get up against it, it would, hurt them. And so we actually have to heat the water outside of the chrysal, kind of like a double broiler situation. Mm-hmm. And so it's constantly temperature monitored. And then, of course, you have to have your salinity levels correct. And the difficult part with that is you have all the air stones in there moving your water, which is causing evaporation. It's heated, causing evaporation. And so your salinity can spike. So you're constantly having to monitor your salinity as well. And of course, if it gets too high, you can't just dump, some fresh water in there because that could shock the Zoe. So instead, we take like a spray bottle and we spray it over the top slowly. So it's kind of like rain. It's really like you're really trying to be nature. honestly.
But what are you trying to replicate in nature? Is it tide pools or something? Where are these crabs dropping their eggs in, and where do the zoe hang out in the wild?
Yeah, actually in the ocean, and so we're just trying to create that tide.
Oh, so the eggs go right into the ocean when they lay them in the wild. So so they're just floating around and hoping not to get eaten, basically.
Yeah, which I'm sure most of them do, because crabs spawn anywhere between. Well, again, depends on the species, but purple pinchers, for example, which have been the most successfully bred in captivity, they can spawn anywhere from 10 to 20,000 zoe at one time, and crabs breed more than once during the breeding season, a lot of them. So yeah, so a lot of them are not making it out.
Right.
Right. But yeah, so we're just trying to create the ocean, and I can tell you, we've had a few tries or attempts, I should say, with other species. And so we try to research the ocean temperature in that region and the salinity in that region so that we can try and replicate that here in our chrysal, as best possible. So once you have, that down and your chrysal is up and running, what happened is we would do our water changes. Everything was looking good. We're feeding the zoe. They were going through their stages. They typically shed every 3 days. And so that's kind of how they go through their stages. Between stage 5 and megalopa takes a few more days. But anyway, so we're going through this whole process. And then by day 7 usually is when that green algae would kind of show up. And by day 11, it was too much, like it just killed the zoe, basically. It was sticky, and the zoe would get stuck in it. We could get them out with the pipette, like we would just take this little pipette and we try to suck them out of the algae. But it must have gotten in their gills or something. They couldn't overcome it. And so by day 11, we just didn't have any more. And
was that the same failure all 4 times? It was always the green algae bloom? Okay.
Yes. And it didn't matter what we changed. Like we tried a different temperature. We tried different salinity. We tried, we tried not feeding certain foods, thinking maybe that was part of it. We did a lot of different things each attempt, but had the same result. And so I did a quick update online and had somebody from our area report that she was trying to raise frogs, and she was having that same problem a couple of years ago, and that it was actually her water. And so we were like, okay, this sounds probable. And so we ordered a test kit for our just regular old kitchen tap water. And sure enough, we have extremely, extremely hard water here. And so that was our issue for those first 4 attempts.
Interesting. See, that's what's great about being able to learn from other animal keepers as well, because there's so much crossover. So you had the same failure, the same algae crash each time, and I guess it just wipes out everybody basically at once. How disappointing is it that 4th time when you walk in and you see the algae? You must have been just so heartbroken.
Yeah, I mean, we were documenting it kind of vlog style on our channel. And so anybody that's interested in the real raw emotions of my daughters and I, go and check it out. But yeah, literally, like I was on the floor thinking, what is, what are we going to do? And it's devastating. It was devastating. Like this whole process is such a roller coaster on your emotions. It's hard to even put it into words. So, you can see these hermit crab babies' eyes in the egg. So you're shining your flashlight at that mama hermit crab that's like turning those eggs for, a month almost. And you can see all of their thousands of eyes just looking at you. And then bam, you have Zoe and like thousands of living creatures right here that you're like responsible for. Yeah. And, it just takes so much effort, and you're just really we're just really invested in it, and we just want to do our best. And then, constantly when you're not successful, it means like thousands of babies have died. Like that's really hard on you. And I think especially when it was the same thing happening, regardless of what we tried, it almost felt like there's no hope. Like we'll never get past this, It's how it felt.
Well, and to add to it too, it's not, in the reptile world, imagine you breed a species that's no one's bred before, and it can be very difficult, but let's say you put eggs into an incubator and then the eggs don't hatch, or they're not fertile, or something goes wrong. That's still sucks, but it's not the same as the amount of work that you have to do to maintain the chrysal, do the water changes. Because I think was it 2 water changes a day, or Three water changes. So hours and hours every single day, hours of work dedicated to that project. So it hurts a lot when it fails.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
So then go ahead.
It did give us some hope though, because that person that posted that online said, all she had to do was switch over to reverse osmosis water and she never had the problem again. And so we're like, okay, that seems simple enough. We just need some reverse osmosis water. And so we ended up, going ahead and putting that in our kitchen. And so that was very helpful.
So now attempt number 5, you have the RO system hooked up in the kitchen. That was probably an expense in itself and an investment. So now you're using RO water. And how far did you get that time?
So that time we got to day 23.
So day 12 must have been a party.
Yeah, day 11. Yeah. Day 10, I was like, please no, we have to get past this curse. Yeah. But, yes, I'm sorry. You're right. So day 12, yes, was a party. Yeah, for sure. Definitely. We were pretty ecstatic and, hopeful for sure. And we're like, okay, we figured it out. It's the RO water. And so, yeah, definitely. Although we were also very okay, now what?
Yeah. You don't prep. You just want to get past it. And then all of a sudden you've got past and now what do you do? So you got through that. Things were looking good. What stage were things at when you hit day 23?
They were stage 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually this was with strawberry hermit crabs. So, we were really, really excited that we had made it so far with an exotic species, but they just never transitioned to megalopa. Okay. And I can't tell you why. To this day, I have no idea. I didn't have a whole lot make it to day 23, but something had to have been missing in their diet is what I'm guessing that helps that particular species make that final molt where they have their claws. And so we haven't had strawberries successfully bred in captivity yet, so we just have to try something different next time.
Yeah. Damn. So then you got to that at day 23. Did they die, or they should have been moving on at that point and they hadn't been?
So they were all just gone by that day when I woke up.
Okay. Damn. Yeah. So another heartbreak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although, we had made it really far, and so I was excited about that, but definitely had, figured that was the end of our breeding season. That was already mid-August, I think. So
this would have been after we spoke last for sure. I'm not, maybe the eggs might have been in the picture when we recorded the last episode. So that happened in late fall or early fall, whatever it was. And then attempt number 6 came along, and by the sounds of it, it wasn't necessarily planned or you weren't necessarily going to go for it. So maybe you could tell us that story now.
Yeah. At this point, the girls were gone to college and I was back at school. I had packed up the entire breeding setup, which we only have out during breeding season because it's in this room and it takes up all of the extra space in the middle of the room. We have this table with all the chrysal and the tanks and all that. And so I had already cleaned everything and literally stored it for the winter, so to speak. And so it was, I think the second week of school, and we were on our way out to the first Friday night football game. And I just happened to come in the crab room, just make sure everything's okay. I kind of do that before I leave. And I could tell from the door, and I looked over here to the saltwater pool and I could see thousands of Zoe swimming around. And so needless to say, I didn't go to the football game.
Plans changed.
Yeah, plans changed. So
you walk in, there's a whole bunch of Zoe, and so what's the next step? Because normally were you letting them drop their clutch of eggs into the aquariums no, you weren't. Okay. So that was not a part of the plan at all. Now you have to pull all these animals out.
Yes. So we did actually have 2 other spawns last summer that did end up in here because I just didn't, the very first one of the season I didn't catch. And then there was another one during the middle of the season that I just didn't. Again, it's the different species. And so I didn't gauge the amount of time that the mom was carrying the eggs to when she would spawn quite right. So we did have a couple times where they ended up in here, but normally I like to time it just right and have the mom put in a separate little, I call it the birthing suite. where, she can drop her eggs and then they're already all contained in a nice clean tank. This one, it's quality wise, it's good water, but it has sand in the bottom and it has rocks in there and it has shells, and trying to get all the Zoe out of this tank is very difficult. For one, it's our tallest tank, and I'm pretty tall. I'm 5'10", but I have to get on a ladder to reach this pool, and I can barely reach it down that far.
So how did you get them? Do you just pull all the water out with Zoe inside, or what did you do to get them out?
So most species of Zoe are light reactive, and so I can shine. Well, you have to have two people to do this in this tank. So one person stands down at the saltwater pool with a flashlight, and the Zoe, for the most part, swim towards that light. And then I use my siphon, this little water. It's just your basic tubing, air stone tubing, pump tubing, whatever. And then I have a straw on the end, like a drinking straw.
Yeah.
Whataburger or whatever. It's very high tech,
Yeah,
anyways. Yeah. And so you basically siphon it out. So I put my little straw in the tank, and then I suck on this side so I can siphon the water up. And then this goes into a collection jar. And I just try to collect the Zoe while they're there towards the light. And it does take several, times. You have to move the light to the other side of the tank and that sort of thing. But the trick is really getting the filter turned off in here, because you're losing lots of them that are being sucked up into the filter.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So so now your daughters are gone to college, you've gone back to work, so it's no longer summer, and you've just decided that you're just going to go for it. Was there a point where you're like, maybe I'll just let this batch go, or you decided like, no, once you see them, you have to try?
Yeah. There was maybe a moment where I was like, how am I going to do this? But I thought, I can't not try. We learn from every attempt. I didn't really think we would be successful. I'm here by myself. I'm at work. But I thought, even if I make it to, whatever, day 15 or something, we'll learn. And we had no idea what species this was, because I didn't think I had any crabs carrying eggs. I thought we were finished.
Right.
So it was kind of like a mystery batch of babies. And what if they were some exotic species or, whatever. And so you would hate to not be able to gather information and just give it your best at an attempt at least. And so, I was like, well, I'm going to do what I can do and see how far we can get.
So how did you do it then? You must have changed. You clearly weren't doing 3 water changes a day. Did you have to completely change your method?
I did. So I did try the filtered chrysal, which I think we talked about a little bit the last time that we were together, but it didn't work in that other attempt. Did we talk about it actually? Did we talk about the filtered chrysal?
I can't remember. I can't remember if that was a theoretical idea at the time or if you'd actually tried it. So maybe you could just refresh our memories on that. Yeah,
because I think it may have been that 5th attempt. So we've been working with somebody in Indonesia. Rizky Pachanto is his name, and he's also trying to, captive breed there as well. And he developed the filtered chrysal. So it's the basic idea of Mary Akers' 2-drum chrysal, but he created this middle chamber where he placed a filter, and then he built 2 spray bars that came out from that middle chamber that would spray into the chrysals. And the inner edge of each chrysal had some mesh. So you've got your circular tide-like motion going on in your in your chrysal, pushing the bad water through that mesh into that center console, or I don't know what you call that center part of the chrysal there, which is being filtered. And so that bad water is then filtered, sucked up into the spray bars, and sprayed back into the chrysal. And so you have this constant rotation of water being filtered, yet the Zoe staying in their chrysals and not being affected or sucked up by that filter. So we tried to incorporate that idea into our chrysal that we had already built, which already had their own 2 drums. And so we just added the filter there in the middle, and we built the spray bars out of garden hose tubing, actually. Very inexpensive and really easy to work with. We just drilled holes in that tubing so that we would get the spray to come out. and it was easily flexible. You could turn the spray to any kind, rotate it to push that water in the direction that you needed to.
Yeah.
And so the filtering part was working pretty good.
So what did you use for a membrane or mesh as through the intake into the filter? Because obviously with these tiny microscopic zoa, you have to use something that's probably pretty fine.
Yes, 200 micron.
Okay. So just, that makes sense. Yeah, you can't use a typical fish tank filter.
No, it was 200. Yeah, and then it's silicone on the outside of the crystal.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. And so this was with the strawberry crabs, and we had the filter system going, and everything was working really good. And one day we had a family outing that we had to go to, and when we came back, devastation, the mesh had become clogged, which meant that the water in the crystals were rising faster than it was being able to empty out. So the spray board was, putting fresh water in too fast. So then the waters overflow into that middle chamber, and we lost a lot of the zoe that day.
Damn.
Yeah.
But like you said, that was number 5, right? So you would have learned into this number 6. So you just make sure you're cleaning the filters on that number 6 round, or?
So we had to get a different mesh. And after the end of the attempt 5, I completely disassembled our double crystal. I mean, I took it completely apart because we had also used live rock in that middle chamber, thinking it would help just with the water quality itself. And it did. I think it did help. But our water was so clean, and we had so much movement in there that we actually grew coral.
Oh, wow.
All over the tank, which made it really difficult to see the zoe inside of the tank. And it was nearly impossible, to get it all off after our attempts failed. And so I just have to start over. I had to start over with a new crystal at that point. So I built a single crystal, which we'd already had the single crystal up and running because we had so many eggs this summer. And so I just ended up using that for this surprise spawn that we had in late August. It was also ready to be, it was filtered. And so I began that attempt using the filtered, but I ended up having the same problem with the water in the crystal rising fast, too fast. It wasn't emptying fast enough. So I just decided to turn off the filter and go back to the old method of several water changes a day, pipetting them out, because I didn't have anywhere to move the zoe at the time. And I was already in school and trying to rebuild that double crystal model. It just wasn't feasible at the time. And so, yeah. So
how are you doing 3 water changes a day with going to work?
So I knew I couldn't do that. So I had to figure out something else. I had to figure out what can I change? And the biggest thing was the amount of food that I was feeding. I had to feed less somehow so that I didn't have to do that middle of the day water change. And so I implemented something that I've just decided to call direct feeding, which we didn't do in any of our other attempts. And what I mean by that is when I would feed the crabs, I would actually bring them to the front of the crystal with the flashlight. And then I would use my siphon to purposely suck as many, if not all, of the zoe into my wastewater jar. And then I took a little medicine cup and used some of the crystal water. And then I put in the dried foods that I was feeding, and I would mix it up in there. And then I would use my pipette and I would suck up some of that food and I would drop it directly over all those zoe in my wastewater jar. And it was like a koi pond, like just this frenzy of feeding. It was so cool to watch.
And was that once a day or twice a day?
I was doing that 4 times a day.
Okay. Every time I talk to you, I just get blown away at the amount of work that you have to do to keep everything moving, and it's amazing. So if you're doing that 4 times a day, you do it twice in the morning, twice in the evening, basically?
Yes. Now, my husband did do an afternoon feeding for me, so I have to give props to my husband. He helped me out with this. So
okay, good.
He would come home, but we would only feed the live Artemia in the middle of the day because it doesn't foul the water as quickly.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so things obviously change. You're busier with life, but the Zoe continued to progress. So what did you start to observe? Like, at what point did you think, wow, this is going to get further than last time?
Actually, pretty early on. So I think because we had so much trouble with that green algae, we were told by a lot of people, I mean, we were all trying to figure out what was going on, but the consensus was we were feeding too much, which was causing the water to create this algae problem, right? And so we weren't feeding them very much, thinking we're overfeeding, right? And so even on a 10-5, we were trying to just be really diligent about feeding very little so that we wouldn't foul up the water. Well, this time I'm doing this direct feed and they're only going to be in this small jar just while I feed them. And then I'm going to just suck up the Zoe and put them back, right? I'm not even going to take any of that dirty water where all that food was that I just put in there. I mean, some I guess we get in, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I was just feeding them. I'm like, here you go, guys, like, buffet. And I just fed them tons. And so they took on so much color right from the beginning. I was like, either these are some crazy species that we've never seen before, or like these are really healthy babies.
So color, what do you mean? Because they're basically clear. What were you seeing?
Oh, so they were clear for all of our other attempts. They were bright orange. I mean, think shrimp.
Really? Interesting, which kind of makes sense. And you can imagine that in the ocean, there is so much debris, and it's like snowing in the ocean all the time. These animals are probably eating perpetually.
Right. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I knew right away, this is working, and these guys are healthy, and they're much bigger, and they were swimming so much more. Before it was like the water would just move these guys. This time around, no, they were swimming. Like they were very active and strong. And my numbers, I had, thousands and thousands and thousands.
Wow. And so, okay, so tell us about the transition from Zoe to Megalopa. What was that experience like? That was your first time seeing that, right?
Yes. So I was getting really nervous by day 23, of course, because, that last attempt ended there. But I still had several thousand on day 23, and they were looking really good. And so, of course, I'm panicking, and I'm messaging, Mary and Risky and, Sue from Australia, like every person who's ever attempted to breed. I'm like, are you sure? Like, they're really going to change. What am I missing? What do I need to do? And they just assured me, just keep looking for these signs. Basically, when the Zoe look pregnant, their bellies get really, really bulging because their claws are in there. And they're like, you're just looking for that. And once you kind of start to see that, then they're going to be Megalopa. And I don't know why, but they always Megalopa first thing in the morning. Like when you come in here and turn on the light, it's just like out come their claws. So it was the coolest thing the first morning when I turned on that light and got to literally see them shed and pop out those claws.
So you're actually actively watching them transition through those phases.
Yes.
What did that feel like?
It was unbelievable, like almost you're in shock. Like, did I see that? Wait, is that really? Yeah, it is, and then I was like crying. So then I couldn't see the other ones. It is like 4:30 a.m. when I'm doing this because, I have to be at school by 7:30. So I would wake up at 4 to get ready for, school. And then by 4:45, 5, I was starting the water change. And so it's early in the morning. And
that's an everyday thing. And maybe the weekends you can sleep in a little bit if you don't have to get to work, but still, that is an insane commitment. So was that day 23 when they transitioned?
No, it was day 20. Hold on, let me think. Day 25. Okay,
so basically a month of waking up early, taking care of these guys. So once they get to Megalopa, is it still the same amount is it still as laborious as it was with the Zoe? Are you still doing all the water changes and feeding? Goodness. Or is it worse? Don't tell me it's worse.
More. It's more.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't think it would be, but it was. Now, I think this is something that I'm going to have to change. I don't think it should be more, but let me try to explain to you. Okay, so, these guys change to Megalopa first thing in the morning. The stage 5 Zoe still in the chrysal will attack the Megalopa. That doesn't even seem right. I mean, these guys are the ones with the claws. You think I don't know how it happens, but so you have to get them out very quickly. So I'm using my siphon to just try and just get the megalopa amongst these thousands of Zoe, because they don't all change at the same time or on the same day. And so I have this little dish. Well, the jar that I usually use is what I'm putting them into, right? Well, a few of the stage 5 Zoe do get caught also. And so I'm catching, I think I had like 8 that first day. So I'm zooming all around in the Chrysler trying to find those 8 megalopa. Well, then I turn around in my little jar here and like, they're gone. The stage 5 Zoe have like, they're all gone.
So did they megalopa or they just disappeared? Like they were eaten or?
Well, I mean, they were dead. Yeah. They were like eaten. Yeah.
Oh,
like,
I see.
6 of them were bitten on. Yeah. Eaten.
Gotcha.
Their tails mostly.
So it's a perpetual battle then.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my God. So what did you do? You went in there at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. and you start doing this, and then you have to go to work, I'm sure, unless it was a weekend. So how did you even manage that first day?
Yeah, it was so sad, but I mean, there weren't that many megalopa, so I was still hopeful. I'm like, okay, well, we learned that lesson. I have to do something different here, but I have thousands more. So there's plenty of hope. And so, I went to school and I texted Faith because she's the closest. And I was like, I'm sorry, you got to come home and help me.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do this part on my own. And so she did. So she came home. And so with 2 of us, we had one dish and we decided, this was Mary's idea. She said, instead of having a jar that's like tall, you have, instead of having volume, you want surface area.
Right.
And so we got literally a baking dish from our kitchen that, was long and wide. And so we had 2 of those sitting on the table. I would siphon the megalopa into the first dish. Faith would pipette the megalopa into the second dish as they were coming through the siphon.
Gotcha.
Yes. And then we also changed that morning. We decided to put food in both dishes. That way, like, okay, don't eat each other. Here's some food.
Yeah. That's kind of crazy that they eat each other like that. I mean, maybe that's a survival thing. You want to be the one that survives.
Right. And Mary has had that happen too. So we knew that was a possibility, but I didn't think it happened that fast. I mean, it happened so fast.
Crazy.
Yeah. So you have to be ready to like make that change like right away. So Faith stayed with me for those first few days until we figured out this process and it was working. And so once we had all of the megalopa in their dish, we would then put the stage 5 Zoe back into the Chrysler. And then we would take the megalopa over to what I called the transition tank. So the transition tank, it was 2 like storage bins, like Rubbermaid storage bins, small ones. Bigger than a shoebox, but I don't know, maybe like 11 by 12 or something, 11 by 13, I guess.
Yeah.
And one of them had salt water and one of them had sand. And then I had a bridge that went from the one tank to the land tank. And so there were shells all over the bottom of the water side of this transition tank. And there were air stones in there moving the water around. Now that's pretty shallow. There's only about 2.5 inches of water in that little transition tank. And so we would put them in there, we count them and put them in there. And then it was kind of their job. They had to find a shell and climb on the land.
Wow. And so at that point, you're just hoping that they actually do it. Because there's so many different steps to this. You can fail at any one of them. So you put them in there, and then how long does it take them to start looking and accepting a shell?
I thought it was going to happen right away. It didn't. I was like, this is going on forever. So I ran into issues right away in the transition tank. There are so many tiny shells. I showed you the size of the shells, right?
Yeah.
They're so tiny. They fit through the siphon without a problem.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
A tiny air hose.
Yes. And the bridge is going down the middle. And you've got 3 air stones in there. And then I also had like a little rock that had a tree on it. I was trying to give them different ways to get out of the water once they had a shell. So there were a lot of things in the way of being able to really see clearly everything in that tub. And you're feeding them. You have to feed them, right? And they're pooping. So water quality became an issue right away for me. And I was having to do water changes in the transition tank. with tiny shells everywhere.
While still managing the Kreisel with the stage 5 Zoe.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes. And so I had a huge spike in ammonia in the transition tank. I lost a lot of the megalopa kind of early on. I was doing 6 water changes in the transition tank a day.
Oh my God. What the hell?
Yeah.
How is that even possible? So were you coming home from work or?
Yes. Yes. So I was, luckily my school is very close to my house. I was coming home on my lunch break, and I had special permission to come home on my conference period because my admin's amazing and they were supporting this great, science experiment. And, I share it with my students and they were all watching, following along and everything. So it was, they wanted me to have that ability to be able to do that. So I would get up at 4 a.m. I would do water change before I went to school. Then I would feed them at 7 right before I left. I would come home at 11. I'd come home at 1, and then I come home at 4 after school. And I would also do one at 7 and then 11.
Oh my gosh. That is just so wild. So how many did you end up getting transitioned from Zoe to Megalopa? Do you know how did you, or was that still too big of a number to actually have a number on?
Yes. So my first Megalopa happened, on day 25. And my last Megalopa happened on day 38.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you're doing both for that long, for like 13 days.
Yeah. So the process started on August 27th. And by the last Megalopa, when I could finally shut down the Kreisel, it was already October 3rd.
Wow.
Yes.
You must have been so exhausted.
I truly, truly was. Yeah. Yes. Very beyond exhausted for sure. Yeah. And so my first Megalopa, day 21st was day 25, September 21st. And then my last Megalopa that came to land was, I think day 38, like I said. Okay. And then by the time they started taking shells, I wasn't actually finished until day 50, which was October 7th.
Okay. So that's when they're starting to pick up shells. And is it starting to get easier at that point once they get onto land?
Once they're on land, yes, that part gets really easy. But it was just so slow, the amount that they were taking shells. And once I got the water quality in check, the next issue that I ran into is that I had so many Megalopa coming up on that bridge without a shell. So we call them naked. And they can't come to land naked. They have to have a shell. So I would be using this pipette and like squirting them back in. I'm like, no, you can't come out.
Well, you got to go get a shell.
Yes. Or I'd take the tweezers and I'd get this little tiny shell and I'd set it right in front of them. I'd be like, this right here.
Will they just dry out if they come to land without a shell? Dehydrate
Yes.
really fast. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So once they would come to land, they get their shell properly, they cross the bridge, and now they're in the sand. Were they just hanging out in that sand area, or were you removing them from there as well and putting them into another container?
Originally, I was going to leave them in that container, and I did at the beginning. But then I was having a really hard time being able to tell which ones had already molted and were actually confirmed hermit crabs and which ones were just coming over. Because again, I was working, so I was at school, and it was, I wasn't there to tell which ones were coming up from the sand and which ones had just made it over from the bridge. So I did start, as soon as they would come over and make it to land, I would move them to a separate land tank that I set up. And that seemed to really help a lot. And, then I could keep a better eye on everything and make sure, that everybody had shells and how many there were and that sort of thing.
So at the end of the day, how many did you get to come to land?
67.
That's a lot. That's pretty. I know obviously there's thousands that you start with, but 67 is still a pretty huge number.
But here's the thing. I had 1,956 Megalopa in there.
How do you know that? Did you count?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So in our little dish every morning when we would get them, I would take them over to transition tank and one at a time pipette them and count them.
You're
so I knew the
killing me.
exact amount. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so, I was like, oh my goodness, like I lost so many. And I know it had to have been the water quality. I really fought with that the whole time. I shouldn't have to do 6 water changes in there. Like it shouldn't be that way. It wasn't that way for Mary. So I really think my problem in the beginning was that I was not moving the shells around in the water enough. And so a lot of debris was getting caught up in the shells.
Gotcha.
And fouling the water. And so I was doing these water changes, but I wasn't getting enough of the debris from underneath the shells and underneath the bridge and all that. So I was just too afraid of moving the shells, and that would like go over one of the megalopa and hurt them, or, I was just afraid I was going to hurt the megalopa. So I was trying to not move very much in the water. And I really think that ended up hurting me in the long run because of the water quality.
So would you just find dead ones on the ground basically, and then you'd pull those ones out, or how are they dying? Or were they dying? They just disappear basically?
Yeah, I think the live ones were eating them.
Right.
I really wouldn't see very many dead ones. So yeah, eventually Mary convinced me that I have to abuse the megalopa. I have to get in there and just be the ocean.
Yes,
and
yeah.
see big waves, moving shells and moving the megalopa. And that, I just needed to not be so scared. And by the time I finally was like, okay, I'm going to do that, then the water got a lot better, but I just think it was too late. I'd already lost so many. So yeah, 67 made it over into land. And then about 3 months later, I did a final survival count into a new tank. And I have 35 that survived.
Okay. Well, it's hard to imagine what you would do with 2,000 hermit crabs. How would you have to like build another house?
True. Yeah.
But so there's a few things that one is, since everything is so new, nobody's doing this. The equipment that you use is all handmade. So I imagine, are you thinking about other ways next time around to agitate that water a little more? Like, can you use, I don't know, wave maker type thing to keep things flowing?
Yes. We're trying to, I've been trying to kind of brainstorm if I could put like a submersible sponge filter in the corner and put some mesh, silicone some mesh around it so that the megalopa can't get through there, but it's still filtering the water. I think I need a new bin that's deeper. I need to have more volume and surface area because you put almost 2,000 megalopa in there. It's just fouling the water so quickly, too fast. I can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that I need to do differently. And I do plan on, working on the Chrysal so that the filter system does work. I know it can, Risky uses it. Sue this past summer from Australia, she built a filtered Chrysal and it worked for her. She got some to land using her filtered Chrysal. So I know it's possible. I just have to, keep working with it until I can find a method that works. So.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say congratulations, because you are in a very small number of people basically in history that have ever done this. Do you know how many people have done it? It's got to be less than 20, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we're third in the United States.
That's amazing.
And I've been told 12th in the world. That
is insane. That's really, really amazing, especially because what's amazing about it is how passionate you and your daughters came to this project. You bought the souvenir type thing, and now you're one of the only people in the history of mankind to have done this successfully, which is just unbelievable.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very, very excited. And I'm sad that Brooke and Faith weren't here for the whole process, but I could not have done what I did without all of, the attempts that we all did together beforehand. And so it's hard for them to see it that way, I think, a lot of times, but, that's how I see it.
Right. And you've mentioned Mary a couple of times. Can we just take a minute to just talk about Mary Akers? Because she seems like an incredible, powerful powerhouse in this domain. And a lot of this stuff was revolutionized by her. So maybe you could just take a few minutes to just mention the accomplishments that she's done and how she's helped you.
Yeah, absolutely. So she wasn't the first one to get crabs to land, but she was the second one in America. And she's the first one to be so successful that she's able to adopt them out, in large numbers, and now for several years consecutively. And so, her methods are definitely working, and it's just her mission to change the industry. And she thinks, this is the best way to do it. And so she also knows she can't be the only one doing it. And so she's so generous that she is, taking under her wing as an apprentice some different, people who are passionate and committed to the process and to the cause. So she actually began Hermit House Breeding as a company. And so I can show you, we're officially certified as Hermit House breeders now.
Oh, awesome.
So it's very, very, very exciting. So really if you hear of people saying that they have captive bred babies, if they didn't get them from Mary Akers, then they're not captive bred. She also partnered with Josh's Frogs just this past fall. And so they are the first retailers to carry captive bred hermit crabs. So,
okay, awesome. Well, Josh has been on the podcast before, so everybody's familiar with Josh's Frogs. So that is really cool. I'm glad that there's an avenue going into the marketplace for them to be sold. And I think we talked about before, it's a tough challenge because of how many are wild caught, how cheaply they're sold, and this souvenir type mindset. But to have captive bred crabs going to people's homes who actually care about the husbandry and plan on setting up a setup similar to yours that's ideal.
Yeah, I think they're very invested, of course, if as you know, Josh's Frogs are invested in captive breeding of animals and ethical care of them and proper training and everything. So I know they've already put out some videos on how to properly set up a crab habitat. They're selling all of the, everything that you need to take care of them. Of course, you can get it through Josh's Frogs. And personally, I think they're very reasonable. Like they want the animals to be taken care of. And so they want everybody to have access to what they need. So it's been an amazing partnership. And I know the hermit crab community is just thrilled that they kind of jumped on board with this movement. So
yeah, that's a perfect partner because Josh has a great mindset and he's all about connecting people with nature while making sure that everything is ethically responsible, responsibly sourced and whatnot. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So why don't we talk about the 30 odd crabs that did make it, and how big are they now? Because how old are they now? They're like 4 months or 5 months old.
Yep, almost 6. Yeah, almost 6. So, well, the first one that came to land was October 7th. So almost 6 months old. And I can tell you, okay, so I showed you the first shell size. So this was their second. When they sized up, these were
still pretty tiny looking.
Yep. And now they are in this size shell.
So those are more like the size of a marble almost.
Yes. Yeah. And I can show you, I have them right here. Let's see if I can get them to come out and say hi.
These are historical crabs. So what species did they end up being? Purple pinchers or?
They are purple pinchers, okay. Yes.
So you're going to have to take another crack at the strawberries then.
Yes, for sure. All right, little friend.
He just rolled away.
Yes. This little dish I'm putting him in is actually the very first water pool that they had as babies. And I had to use a bridge for them to get in and out of this because they were so tiny. Hopefully he'll come out. But
oh, yeah, I can see him. Wow, that's amazing. It's funny because you never see them that small because the only ones you see are wild-caught adults, really.
Right. Well, he is I was hoping to call on this to help you see him better. Call on this little bridge, you guys. They're not nearly as shy as adult crab, as the wild-caught crabs.
Well, I can imagine how, yeah. I mean, that's with captive breeding, it's going to be a whole different experience with them. There we go.
All right. He's not a fan.
He's ready to run.
Yeah.
Well, that is amazing. So at what age, what's the plan with these guys?
So we actually, we have a lot of people from Crab Central Station that are interested in our very first captive bred babies that we got to land, of course. And I wish we had more. I totally wish we had more so that everybody who wanted one could get one. But, I did everything I could and this is what we have. So I'm going to keep a few for the breeding program for just science and so forth. And so we're probably going to adopt out 27 of them. And I'll keep 8. And I think what we're going to try to do is more of a fundraiser so that we can put the money back into the breeding program and just, help it to grow and help to have better resources and and things like that. And so our idea right now, our thoughts, which we're still kind of playing with how this will actually happen, but I think we're going to do kind of a silent auction type thing.
Okay, cool.
So,
and then they'll make it to their new homes, and that's amazing.
yeah.
And so when will the next project start, or the next breeding project start? Because, you'd mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, there's the crab crawling around behind your shoulder there that's carrying eggs. So are you going to attempt with those, or you will?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have 2 lilas right now carrying eggs. And so I'm going to get the Chrysler up and running here. Of course, I'm still in school. So we'll be back to me working on this by myself, at least the beginning. But I think the girls will eventually be here before it's over. But Lila is a species that has an abbreviated larval stage, which I'm really excited about. And so they are, supposedly they go from stage, 1 to being a megalopa in 9 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you should have more sleep this time, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. So, and when they're spawned, they're already like so much bigger than the purple pincher Zoe, or even like strawberry or Ecuadorian. And so they're easier to just see and work with just right from the beginning. They don't have as many though. I can already tell you, looking in these 2 shells here, there's not near the amount of eggs.
But that's probably a good thing.
Could be. I mean, I have less margin for error.
Right. Yes.
To be successful, but also shorter amount of time in the water.
And less waterfowling as well.
Right. Yes. So Risky had lilas spawn last summer, and they did megalopa, but didn't take shells and make it to land. So there's still a lot to learn about that species for sure.
That's incredible. Well, it's an amazing story. I'm so happy that you had success doing this. I don't think anyone would have doubted it after talking to you last time, because you're so focused and you're just eager to make this work. So you'll probably make some adjustments, I'm sure, to make it less labor intensive. And it'll just, every time you go through it, I'm sure there'll be new equipment that you can design and new equipment that you can create to make this continually easier to do.
Yes. I mean, that's our goal. We need to find the simplest way and most accessible way so that we can, take on new breeders. So, Mary can't be the mentor for all of us, but as we get more and more experience, then, I'll take a breeder or 2 under my wing and help them along. And so that we can just continue to grow hermit house breeding to the point where, we can be the suppliers for hermit crabs rather than wild caught. But in order for that to happen, we do have to simplify the method. We do have to find a way that's replicable, over and over consistently, that other people are able to do and have a job.
Do you guys have a grasp on how many wild caught crabs do come over, on the number?
I don't. I think because there's no regulation. I mean, and you don't even have to register to go catch hermit crabs. You know what I mean? So there's no way to even track how many people are collecting and bringing them to these holding bats. So I just there's millions. I know that.
Well, and it's almost, you wouldn't even need to replace the entire wild caught market, because a huge section of the wild caught market is that souvenir mindset. So it'd be just good to just have that eradicated completely. And like you said, it's weird that an animal can be treated as a souvenir, but they are actually. That's actually, you walk in, you see the painted shell, you buy it, and you go home, and then it dies. And so all of that could basically be eliminated, and then maybe just pet stores selling them and, private breeders selling them.
Yeah, that would be a huge help in the whole movement. And I know that there are people advocating down there, to stop the sale of souvenir crabs. And at the end of every summer, those shops literally throw them in the trash can. They put them in a bag and throw them in the trash can. I'm not even kidding you.
Wow.
When people stop going to the beaches, that's what they do with these crabs.
Yeah, just total waste. Can they be adopted out at the size they are now, that we're just saying, it's around the size of a marble? Is that too small to send it to a home, or is that okay?
So my hermit crabs are growing really, really fast. They're actually wearing shells the size that the ones I adopted from Mary were when they were a year old. And so size-wise, I think they could be adopted out, but we typically wait until they're a year old. That's at least that's what we've been doing. So they will be available for adoption this summer.
You're going to have a lot of crabs on your hands in like 2 or 3 years from now. Have you thought about that at all? Or you're just taking it sort of one clutch at a time?
Taking it one clutch at a time. I think that was definitely a concern for Mary because she's gotten hundreds to land, really hundreds, like each summer, 100, 700, 800. So,
wow.
Yeah. So I know that was definitely a concern for her, but when she partnered with Josh's Frogs, and they actually, the very first time that they publicized that they had captive bred hermit crabs for the price that they listed them, they sold out so fast. And they actually have had a difficult time keeping them in stock because, of course, they have the correct substrate. So they're always, having some crabs that are up and some that are molting. And so they only ever list for sale the ones that are currently not molting.
Right.
And so they've said for the most part, they have enough inquiries for them that, they're just always waiting for crabs to come up from molt. And so, at some point, could we flood that market?
I doubt it. I can't imagine because there's so many people interested in it. You would have to have so many crabs to flood that market, I think.
Yeah, especially if we can get the exotics, I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah.
I know there's tons and tons of people. Lilas are so rare in the United States, and strawberries as well. They're really just hard to come by. We also have violas and brevis and Ecuadorians. So
a lot to work with there.
Yes.
So are Mary's captive bred ones, are those in Josh's facilities? Like she brings them the bunch of crabs and then they're out of her hands and Josh takes care of them or his staff takes care of them? Okay.
Yes. So, and I think, for now we've kind of kept it at sending purple pinchers because they're the most well-known and the easiest to care for. They're kind of the hardiest species that we know of. And if we do eventually get any of the exotic breeds to land, I don't know how we're going to handle, the adoption and sale of those just yet, because they do require more advanced setup and more advanced knowledge about hermit crabs. And so just vetting the right person is going to be important because you'd hate to send, these babies out to somebody that doesn't really know how to care for them, since it is different than the purple pinchers.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. One other thing I wanted to make sure we highlight is your daughter, I think Faith did, I think it was her that put it together, that documentary last summer. It would have been right after we would have spoke, or I don't think it was out last time we spoke because I don't think we mentioned it, or maybe it was out, but we didn't mention it, but it's a great documentary. Maybe could you talk a little bit about what that is? It's about 45 minutes.
Yes. So she actually created that documentary as our CrabCon talk last summer. And
right.
It's kind of just the plight of the hermit crab, the industry itself. And then it gets into Mary's story of captive breeding and the process of sending those babies out to their very first, adoptions. And then you actually get to hear from adopters and their story, why they support this movement, what it means to them, and kind of just how their baby hermit crabs are doing, what differences they've noticed between wild caught and captive bred and that sort of thing. So it was an interesting documentary to do because it was, of course, during COVID. We were documenting all of that and collecting all of the video footage during COVID, and so it's all done over Zoom. That was difficult, but also interesting and historic for the times. So it's kind of neat to be able to have that little bit of history as well documented. And Faith she's talented, and so she put together a phenomenal documentary.
Yeah, it's really good. It's very professional, and she leads into each thing. It looks like somebody who's made lots of documentaries before put it together because it's really well done. So I'll make sure it's in the show notes for people so they can go check it out and learn more about that whole community of you guys, because it's not just you. Like we said, it's Mary and there's a few others, and it's an amazing project. And I just love the energy that all the hermit crab keepers have because you're so motivated to make this work. And it couldn't get worse as far as the amount of work that you have to do. So it's incredible the amount of motivation, determination you all have to make this successful.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you couldn't have said it any better than you did. I mean, this could not be possible without the many, many people for decades that have been collecting information and keeping crabs to figure out how we need to take care of them in a way where they actually do breed. I mean, that was the first step. Hermit crabs weren't being bred in captivity because they weren't mating. They weren't breeding. So that meant we were missing something in their environment. And so there's so many people that have been trying different things, documenting it, and then sharing it so that we could get to the point where hermit crabs were actually breeding in captivity. And then, of course, Mary, who she definitely took information from people who, had success before her, and kind of built off of their information and so forth. And so, now it's kind of a worldwide, it's a worldwide commitment. Like I said, Mary mentored me, but also Rizky Putranto from Indonesia. And, like I said, Sue was helping me from Australia, plenty of other people here in the States as well. But, and a lot of encouragement from the whole community at the Land Hermit Crab Owner Society. So it's definitely a whole community effort coming together, sharing and encouraging each other to make it happen. So.
Yeah, it's very evident, and that's exactly what I notice is the amount of encouragement from each party is pretty remarkable, because we do not see that in every specialty animal, and especially the reptile world. There's lots of infighting and throwing names at each other, and it's so nice to see a community that's all encouraging together and working towards an immensely hard project. So it's amazing. Again, congratulations on doing this successfully, because it's being one of the first people in the world basically to do this is amazing. Is there anything else that we didn't mention today that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I think we covered everything.
I think so.
I'm excited that we get to share this with everybody on the podcast, because I know lots of people tuned in, and so I hope that they're excited to hear about what's going on, and I just thank you for the opportunity. Oh yeah, no problem. I'm happy to do it. And like I said, it is the most popular episode that I've ever done. So it's kind of funny. A reptile basically based podcast is the episode about the crabs really took the show, because it is such an incredible story. And it's a remarkable story. And there's so much to learn from it that people can pull from in their own animal keeping, whether they're keeping crabs or not. Can you let everybody know where they can find more information about yourself and Crab Central Station online? Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have our YouTube channel, Crab Central Station on YouTube. We also have a website, www.crabcentralstation.com. We also have TikTok, Crab Central Station, Instagram, Crab Central Station, and Facebook, Crab Central Station. So if you just Crab Central Station on Google, you pretty much can find us. And we do some different stuff on the different platforms, but obviously all of our care videos, the vlogs on our breeding attempt is all on our YouTube channel, which is also linked, of course, to our website. So either of those places is a great place to start. Awesome. And, in a year or two, maybe some of the listeners can actually adopt some of the crabs from your home, from Crab Central Station yourself. That would be amazing. That's the goal. Well, maybe we'll have to do another update in a year or so, because I'm sure by then you'll have some more success. And so anyway, until then, Darcy, thank you so much for sharing your story. I do really appreciate it. I know it's remarkable and exciting and interesting. And also, I'm just, every time I speak to you, I'm just blown away at the amount of work that you and your daughters are doing to make this work. So thank you so much for joining me again. Absolutely. Appreciate it. It's been great. Good talking with you. All right, that is the end of that episode. Darcy, thank you so much for joining me again and telling your incredible story. Like I said in the intro, every time I talk to you, I'm just completely mind blown at the amount of work that you and your daughters do to make this successful. It seems like every step of that process gets more and more tedious and more difficult. So it is a testament to your dedication, the fact that you guys have stayed on top of it and actually learned through all those failures and actually had a successful breeding. It is amazing. I love the story. I can't wait to have you on again. I'm sure we'll have to do another one in the future. So good luck. For the listeners, thank you so much for listening. Let us know in the comments, how incredible is this story? If you are interested in
learning more about captive hermit crab breeding, make sure you go check out their channel, Crab Central Station. If you enjoy this podcast, share it on social media. Facebook, Instagram is really the easiest way to share it. That way we can find new listeners to the show. If you are interested in learning more about the podcast, head to animalsathome.network.com. There you'll find show notes for all the episodes that have been recorded. And if you are interested in joining us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month, you can do that at Animals at Home. Nope, that's not it. Patreon.com/animalsathome. And finally, thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And I think that is it. I will see you guys very, very soon.